play live, do you think, or is it, you know?
I'm pretty sure I will, yeah. I've kind of rejigged. Not that Emma was not a priority. You totally were, Emma. Oh, yeah, Claire.
Oh, there you go. What a small world.
Yeah, she is on tomorrow at 10:45 your time, so that's 11:45 my time. I'm going to take lunch then, I'd say.
Well, look forward to catching up with you then, Evie.
Cool.
Just to say, I paid Evie to say that, so thanks, Evie.
Don't say that out live. Don't forget, this is live. Oh, we'll have to edit that out, Mara, in the recording. Just take that out. We can't let people know that we've got backhanders going on here to pat each other on the back. Right, it's 11:44, which means we're back on track. It's all perfect. And we next speaker, like I said, is going to be Mr. Ben Cormack, who is now unmuted. Hey, Ben, how you doing?
I'm all right, Matt. How are you, mate?
I'm all right, mate. Yeah, sweet as, good as, yeah.
I'm part of your diversity as well, as a member of the lower classes with my strong Cockney accent.
Definitely. And this is why this year, not only have we got translation simultaneously into Spanish, there'll also be subtitles provided for those of you who struggle with some of the speakers and they're more kind of, yeah.
Oh, no.
You're not in Watford, are you? You're not in London at the moment, where are you?
No. I live down on the south coast now. I'm going to go into my posh accent. I'm going to become a social butterfly now to make sure that I am, you know, connecting with the audience.
You must be you're around Kent somewhere, aren't you?
I'm down on the south coast, down in Ramsgate now, which is a wonderful, beautiful, scenic part of the world.
Yeah, they must love you there. There goes the neighbourhood.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if I brought it up or dragged it down, or, you know, who knows.
All right, mate. Well, thank you so much for being one of the speakers. I think Mara's going to give you a chance to share your screen now, and we'll take it away.
Yes, it's now right now. Yeah.
Ah, the magic of Zoom. There we go. All works.
Yeah. Perfect.
Fantastic. Well, look, first of all, I'd like to thank Matt for inviting me to come and have a chat over the wonders of the interwebs. I would have very much liked to have been able to do this in the live capacity and sit down and have a drink with people and have a chat and, you know, get to do those late night kind of setting the world to right sessions that we always tend to do at conferences. You know, unfortunately, we've got to do it like this. I've known Matt for many years, actually, both kind of personally and professionally. And we always have some good banter, which is the most important thing. All the science stuff, forget all that. It's about good banter, good connections. And I think that's part of the pleasure of, you know, making connections in these lines of work. So I don't know if I've got too many slides or too little. We're going to find out. Half an hour is kind of a funny amount of time. But I am going to be talking about movement variability, something that I've been discussing over the years quite, you know, regularly. And we're going to be discussing, is it hope? Is it hype? Or is it just part of reality? Is it just another one of these things that we need to think about when we are working with people? So we're going to have a look at some data, have a look at some of the research. You're going to get some of my opinion. I'm very free with my opinions, as people probably know. So I'm going to give you some of that as well. And yeah, let's have a look at what we're doing and what's going on. So what is movement variability? Let's define what we're discussing here. So this is from the work of 𝐒𝐸𝐿. And it's he says one of the most common features of human movement is its variability. Human movement variability, nonetheless, can be described as the normal variations that occur in motor performance across multiple repetitions of a task. This variability is intrinsic, good word, and in all biological systems, and it can be observed quite easily. If a person tries to repeat the same movement twice, the two actions will never be identical. And I think this kind of sometimes clashes with our idea of exercise prescription, with our idea of good form, with our idea of incorrect, bad, or good movement. You know, we tend to have these very, not well defined in the research, but more defined in terms of what, you know, theory and general understanding. And I think what's really good is to just look at some of the data around this subject and how it might influence how we work with people, and how it might influence, you know, how we teach exercise, how we look at things like running form. And I just wanted to point out I am the world's worst runner. I hope that there are other people competing with me for that title in the audience. I'm sure there are. And one of the big things that I've managed to escape by doing this on Zoom is like someone suggesting going for a run in Brighton at the conference. And we've dodged a bullet. I've totally dodged a bullet there, which is, you know, there's positives and negatives to all this. All right. So variability, let's keep on track. So if we think about movement variability, you know, when we talk about things like running form, we definitely have kind of what people see as ideals. And, you know, if you have a running coach, they will suggest this is good running and this is not good running. But then if we were to go to a gym and stand behind a bunch of treadmills, would we see a huge variety of the way that people run? If we look at some of the top Kenyan runners, you know, we certainly see some interesting things that we might not see as ideal or perfect. And people bring up, you know, some of the guys with their huge overpronations, etc. We have a picture of Paula Radcliffe there, who had that world women's title for so long. But would we describe her style as ideal? Would we describe it as something we would go and teach to other people? But certainly it seemed to work for her and it was efficient. So sometimes our movement needs to be seen as a little bit of a fingerprint that, you know, we have these very strong ideas about how humans should function. So whether that's their posture, whether that's, you know, the way that they move. And I think sometimes we need to see the standard deviation as a little bit wider sometimes than we currently discuss. All right. So why do we need to talk about movement variability? Because I think we have an overly simplistic understanding of movement in medicine, health, and fitness generally. You know, we have these kind of wonderful models and pictures of the way the body works like a machine, but it doesn't. It's a complex human biological organism, and that's very different from a simple biomechanical thing or a mechanical thing. We can measure things biomechanically, but it doesn't mean that the organism is biomechanical. All right, I think that's important. It's biological. It means it adapts. It means it's variable. And often we take these movement flaws and we blame them for people's injury. Overpronation, what a great example. You know, if you look at, you know, you go on and type overpronation into Google, you'll have all sorts of, you know, things that pop up, and ankle injuries and hip injuries and back injuries and knee injuries. We'll blame on this thing. But actually, when you look at overpronation, we don't know what over is particularly. We haven't really got a very good definition of pronation in general. And I know that Kevin, who's presenting tomorrow, has a wonderful blog that goes through this in massive amount of detail, pointing towards, you know, what we know about pronation and this kind of movement flaw. And I think what we can end up doing is we get these rules, don't we? We get these rules that we use about good and bad movement. And people get this obsession with the idea of correct form. You know, you need to do an exercise like this. This is the way that it needs to be done. And sometimes, you know, we can put people in movement jail. People become the movement police. And I steal that from my good friend, Mark Cargila of Modern Pain Care. And, you know, I think actually putting people in movement jail is something that I've seen in clinical practice a lot over the years. This idea that, you know, your bad movement has contributed to the problem. Don't do this movement. Don't do that movement. And actually it ends up really affecting some people. Much more than the person who's doing it ever realizes, that downstream, the next practitioner is the one that has to deal with this. A little bit of an example. So this was a paper that came out a few weeks ago or last week. I can't remember. And I thought that kind of makes the point that we have this idea of what is good running form. And, you know, what good running form would probably lead to good running economy. And again, I'm no running expert. I'm not really an expert in anything, but don't tell anyone. Don't tell Matt. But what was really interesting with this paper is that they're trying to find this visual ideal of, you know, what is good running form, and that will lead to good running economy. But they couldn't define, they couldn't pick out the people who were economical against the people that weren't by visual identification. So the ideal, the perception of what is good and bad maybe doesn't always tie into the reality of what is good and bad. And again, would you say Paula Radcliffe was the efficient runner with the head bobbing around and doing all these things? I think you might say no, you know, if you didn't know that she was everything that she is. And so I think it just questions our ideas of ideals. And again, that's really what evidence-based medicine is really for. I think sometimes we can take a subject and we can say, are these things that we talk about on the internet and read and even see in research concepts, are they actually as solid as we think they are? So evidence-based medicine for me often tells us what not to do, not always what to do. And for me, there's a big value in that. So I think what would be good for us to do then is have a little look at understanding movement a little better, so that can then inform the way that we go about doing stuff. So we need to see movement as what they describe as an emergent phenomenon. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into the philosophy of emergence because it's a complicated area, probably above my pay grade, to be honest with you. But if we think about complex systems have a number of subsystems working together, from our energy systems to our motor system, etc. And then we have a task, and then we have, you know, individual constraints and environments, the weather, the surface we're running in or running on, you know, the wind and the rain. We have things like the task that, you know, running different speeds, or running on a football pitch versus long, steady distance running. And then we have our individual constraints, and that might be our hopes, dreams, and fears. It might be our fatigue. It might be our injury status. And these things come together, you know, within this complex organism we call people. And there's nothing stranger than people, I think you'll agree. But they come together and they create spontaneous behaviors. So if I'm on a football pitch and I'm with a ball and I'm running at someone, how the person in front of me behaves influences how I behave. That would be a spontaneous emergence of a motor behavior. And I think we have to understand that sometimes we cannot simply see movement as a simplistic thing. It's much more complex than we like to give it credit for. Now, pain is complex and emergent. Conversations within the clinic are complex and emergent, dependent on my attitude towards someone's attitude towards me, the questions that I ask. So, you know, we need to move away from just this simple idea that movement looks like X and it stays like X. It doesn't, it evolves, it shifts, it changes according to the constraints occurring. Now, when one of the first guys to look at this was a guy called Bernstein, and he did some wonderful stuff in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And he first looked at blacksmiths, and he looked at them hitting a piece of metal repetitively. Now, he described this phenomenon of repetition without repetition. It goes back to what 𝐒𝐩𝐿 was talking about. This idea that if we repeat something, it probably is repeated differently. Now, you know, Bernstein saw this as error. He thought that if we could get rid of this, you know, repetition, that we would be left with an optimal motor pattern. So his idea of motor control, do you like that? Motor control was to eliminate the other variations and retain this optimal. Now, the question that's been asked more recently is it error or is it resource? So people like Mark Latache have come along, and he describes the bliss of abundance. So rather than control, we have this idea of abundance, whereby the error is a resource. It allows us to do things. It allows us, you know, to be human beings. So maybe we need to switch our idea. And if we think about exercise, what do? Oh my God, that was a bad rep. You know, we need to correct that straight away. Oh my God, you run terribly. Let's correct that. Whereas actually maybe this error isn't error. You know, maybe our mindset is too closed. If we think about a mean value of human running, how broad is the standard deviation? How wide are the confidence intervals? And I think that these would be things that we have to think about in terms of sampling and just in terms of general variation. So what does it allow us to do, this movement abundance? Well, it allows us to deal with different tasks. It allows us to deal with different environments. And most importantly, actually, we talk about load, which is a tiny bit of a nebulous concept, if we're being honest. It spreads load across structures. All right. So if we think of stress, now we're all under a lot of stress at the moment with this crazy COVID stuff, but we're talking about stress here in terms of force times area. So the more we vary our movement, the more we vary loads, the more we vary force over structure. And I think that while we cannot say that, you know, injury is another complex phenomenon that is emergent, you know, there's lots of discussion about the complexity of injury. Could it be part of that? And I think, yes, when we start to look at the data behind movement. So we probably should look at some of this data, right? And so I'm a bit of a data nerd sometimes, and I like to look at, you know, kind of this area of research. It's something that gets me going for some strange reason. Other people are really exciting. I'm a bit of a nerd, but I'm going to own it. I'm owning it, right? So this is some work that looked at asymptomatic people. They were testing a stretch sensor, walking across some treadmill, walking across some overground stuff. And this was the variations for, you know, one person across these different walking trials. And what we see is this variation. So if we look at the same person doing the same thing a number of different times, we tend to see this difference. And if you've ever used any kind of motion analysis software or any of those kind of little stretch sensors like 𝐒𝐻𝐿 or anything like that, you'll know that the data you get back is just literally all over the place. I spent some time some years ago working with 𝐒𝐻𝐿 a little bit, trying to make sense of some of this data. And in the end, it was just a bit like, and so we can see here this around this general movement template. You know, some different parts of the gait cycle are going to be more constrained due to mechanics, etc. But we see this natural variation. And which one is wrong? Which one is right? We don't know. But, you know, if we were going to look at it from the outside, I'm sure there would be some people that said, oh, that's not good, or, oh, that's pretty bad, you know. So I think it's important that we look at this thing a little bit broader. And again, we see some work here from Reid Ferber, and the black line here is the mean value again. And, oh, skip one too many. Again, this is post-rehabilitation. And when we look at, you know, the variations that we see here, and this was the people within the study, not just one person, as I recall, we can see that, again, if we imagine we have this mean, we also have this standard deviation. And then if we overlaid a larger sample, population sample, we'd probably see a really big confidence interval of, you know, yay big. That's very technical scientific language, by the way, yay big. And we see that there is this variation. So which one's right? Which one's wrong? Which one is going to lead to more injury? Which one's going to run fast? You know, I don't always think we know that, but doesn't stop people sometimes from being free with advice about what's right, what's wrong, what's going to lead to injury, what's caused injury, etc. Maybe we just need to take a step back and say, what do we really know here? Does our idea, does it fit with the data that we have? And again, you know, sometimes we don't always know what to do with data. So the big problem with research data sometimes is we have so much of it and we don't always know exactly what it means. But I think we can start to broaden our idea about what human movement is, should be, looks like, and how it should influence our clinical practice or our coaching practice or our exercise practice. So this was a great study from Lundgren, 2007, and this was great because they one of the big things about biomechanical research is they, you know, we're trying to get rid of data artifacts, so skin markers, etc. are kind of blamed for, you know, errors in the data, etc. Now what they did here was they stuck pins into bones. Now who went for this, who you know, who stuck their hand up and said, this is for me? I don't know, but it threw back some really interesting data, really comprehensive paper that showed this variation that happens. And they used pretty colors as well. I love pretty colors. And they showed this wonderful variation and graphical kind of data translation here, just to show, again, these are asymptomatic people, different joints move differently in different people, whether that's motor, whether that's anatomical, you know, we just don't know. And again, we don't know how people should move, but maybe we may, you know, we don't always know how they shouldn't move either. All right, I think that's a bit of a key. And if you wanted to play a game, and we like games, I try and be fun and light-hearted. If you have a pen and paper, you could draw your name, for example, write a signature. Can you write it exactly the same way every time? Or is there a performance variation, even in something as unique to you as your own signature? You know, if you had a handwriting expert come along, they'd say, well, That's, you know, we can tell it's you, but could you do you repeatedly again and again and again? Exactly. And I think that's that biological variation that we see. Now, if we were going to get really technical, we could go into the motor theory. We could talk about, you know, the uncontrolled manifold hypothesis and, you know, all these other things, but we're not going to do that. We're going to keep it light, possibly because I'd messed that stuff up anyway. This was a piece of research from 2019 that looked at the variability of a squat. So they took 10 healthy males, they looked at their kinematics, and they looked at between subject, which would be inter, and then within subject, which would be intra, variability of the way that people performed these movements. Now, I do like a good visual depiction. And here what we see is one participant doing 6 different squats within this single repetition sets of 90% of our 1 RPM. And we can see this kinematic variation. So kinematic just being movement of the joint. And then you would also have kinetic, which is the energy flow at a joint as well. And we just see this normal variation. Which one's good? Which one's bad? Which one's normal? Which one's abnormal? Which one puts someone at more risk? I don't know. I have no idea. Or is it just part of human behavior? So how might that influence your practice now teaching a squat? You know, sometimes do we give, if you think about a squat, you know, take your legs this far apart, knees this far apart, neutral spine, chest up, shoulders back, chin in, and suddenly we've turned people into robots. Is that a reflection of thoughtless, fearless human movement, as Gifford might have suggested? So, you know, I think that that's the data maybe frees up some of what we do and how we do it to people, because maybe it's not us it's going to affect, it's the end user that gets conscious and, you know, and maybe it's detrimentally affected. So what did they say, these guys? And I'm just going to move my Zoom box over here. Considering the current results where we've shown that trained participants perform the back squat exercise differently from one another and with considerable variability from trial to trial, the notion, and that's a great word, right? Notion, that there is an optimal movement pattern for the back squat exercise, which should be adhered to by all individuals to attain maximum performance, is not supported. So this idea that this perfection, this idea that this, you know, risk-free, this idea that, you know, do it wrong, you're going to get hurt, perpetuation that we have sometimes, I don't know if that's always reflected. So I'm not saying I suggest, you know, I know what's going to cause these things, because I don't. But I do know that sometimes our notions of what's proper and improper it is kind of different maybe to what we think about. So how does that relate to pain and injury? Maybe we're stepping more into my wheelhouse now. So this was work from Hamill. This is kind of a variability classic back in '99, when even I was a young man. And what they looked at here was a group of, and again, the way that you measure these things is quite technical. And they look at coordinative and look at endpoint variability and various stuff. Again, if Matt gave me a couple of hours to talk, we could go into that stuff. But they found that the variability of those that were healthy was actually greater than the variability of those that had injury. So, and this is quite consistent, actually, I believe, within the literature. It's not perfect, but I see a consistent theme that variability after pain tends to be decreased. And I think that would fit with our idea of pain and protection to some degree. This idea that the body wants to protect itself from, you know, further injury, and it probably does that by reducing movement and reducing loads. We see that with ACL injuries, etc. But it's really interesting data. Now, again, do we know exactly what to do with it? I don't know. There's not a lot that we know. We could ask the question, does it need to change? And again, movement and pain are so complex. We can't say that there is any really simple linear relationship between these things. But this was a paper that came out a couple of weeks ago looking at gait retraining and patellofemoral pain. And they did some small adjustments within this, such as step rate and contact time, as I recall. And they did that as an intervention. And one of the things they found was this persisted over time, and also that this increased variability was observed after this intervention within the joints. And, you know, again, we can't draw linear conclusions. It's just interesting data to look at. And they found that, you know, they know that these kinematics influences patellofemoral joint stress, which changes loading patterns, and they felt partly would have an explanatory a clinical effect. All right. So but it's not just patellofemoral pain that we see, or running or knee, but we see this quite a lot in an area I know a bit more about, which is the lower back. Again, we had this, you know, long-term kind of concept of core stability, and, you know, we need to get that core firing and, you know, get it stiff and stable. But actually, when you look at people with back pain, we see that there might be more stability and less variability as a consequence. So this is work from 2002, and it said, in comparison with healthy participants, the gait of patients with lower back pain was characterized by a more rigid, less flexible pelvis-thorax coordination. So what happens in terms of rotation at the upper body and rotation at the lower body. And then in between is our wonderful trunk. And if that becomes stiffer, does it change what happens between the 2 points above and below? And then we have a follow-up, very, very similar work. And we know science is great when it's reproduced. They said these results support the argument that people with lower back pain adopt a protective movement strategy, possibly by increased trunk stiffness. And we see some of the kind of graphical depiction of how people adhered more to this kind of linear area rather than, you know, were much more around it in terms of correlation. This was some interesting work by Deborah Faller looking at intramuscular, so not movement variation, but intramuscular variation during a functional lifting task. And they used fine wire electrodes, stuck it into the erector spinae during a free lifting task, and they looked at the results. Two groups, one would be our healthy controls, one would be our back pain patients. And as we can see here, we see a really nice, you know, as we go through the lifting movement, motion from the muscle, cranial to caudal, caudal, not cordial, that's something you drink, from up here to down to here to down to here. Now, in comparison, and you know, they said it the best in the paper, who am I to change the wording? In contrast, people with lower back pain perform the repetitive task by increasing the activation of the same regions of the muscle. Again, implications for fatigue, etc. over the duration of the task, that is without variability in muscle activity. All right, so we see a definite difference between intra and movement inter-participant, but then also intra-participant muscular variability, which I think is pretty interesting stuff personally. Now, great work from Paul Hodges, simply entitled Moving Differently in Pain. And we can see that actually injury and pain have a really interesting effect on the way that we move. You know, many years ago, I was taught pain switches muscles off. And, you know, since then we've discovered, well, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it actually makes them activate a little bit more. So that will be my dog. There we go, is the wonderful work of the wonderful thing of doing it in your house. But we're going to be professional and carry on. So the distribution of activity within and between muscles, the avoidance of movement, reduced force output, avoidance of function, activity or participant limitation, enhanced or reduced variability. There's so many different changes that can occur with the presence of injury and post-injury as well. And sometimes these things persist over an extended period of time. So again, we see here another wonderful schematic. I like to post this up in my course and I ask, what does this mean to you? And simply for me, it's just simply about complexity. It's just simply about, these are all the things that can occur. It's about the complexity of what happens with injury, etc. So, you know, these are things that are hard to simply say, you know, this happens or this happens or this happens. There is variability even within the response. All right. So what are our takeaways? And I think we've done okay for time. I'm usually good at running over. Don't stress about perfect form, perfect movement, perfect whatever you want, perfect exercise. You know, that there is such a variation of human structure, human function, that perfect is really difficult to attain because we don't actually know what perfect is. And sometimes the chase for perfection might be a problem. Don't simply blame injury on bad movement. Again, you know, the complexity view of injury is starting to come out, the kind of complex systems. Dynamical systems perspectives are really starting to come out. There's been some good papers in BJSM over the last few years. And it's, you know, we can't simply blame injury on just bad movement. It's a complex scenario. We need to find the Goldilocks zone. All right, finding the Goldilocks zone. So too much randomness, too much noise is not the answer. But then too much rigidity is not the answer. And it's somewhere in the middle where healthy, natural, human variation is allowed to occur. Now, that might change with loads or it might change with speeds. But sometimes we do need to allow it to occur or emerge, that we need to create an environment to allow these things to happen. All right. Sometimes overcoaching, you know, too much focus on this, you know, form aspect can be detrimental for some people. For some people, rehabilitation is about letting go, not controlling stuff. Don't be that guy. Don't be the sergeant major. Don't be the movement police. Don't put people in movement jail. You know, I think that Mike James said it earlier that, you know, sometimes we can, you know, be too focused on these kind of things. And we end up, you know, making it not a fun experience and not an experience that's contributing to that person. And there may be, you know, mental aspects as well as physical aspects. Maybe we need variability in how much we enjoy things sometimes, you know. Not all training has to be the same. So to finish off, for me, variability, change is good, right? Whether that's different sports, we know that when we look at things like early specialization for kids, that playing the same sport leads to breakdown. But what are we as adults? We're late specializers. We become runners, or we become triathletes, or I'm a tennis guy, or you know, and sometimes exposing ourselves to different things is natural, it's normal, it's healthy. We get different movement patterns. That's great, because actually, if you think about our movement experiences over the years, they diminish and they diminish and they diminish, and we become so habitual. Maybe we could, you know, expand that. Maybe we can have new experiences, and that might affect us all across the biopsychosocial spectrum. Could we have variation in our exercise? You know, strength training. I know that there are going to be people talking about strength training, and for running, that's going to be great. But is it always specific to strength, or sometimes is it just a variation in loads? Is it just something else that isn't running, for example? All right. Could it be cycling? Could it be yoga? And then finally, the intensities of training. You know, it's good to have, some people are very intense with their exercise, HIIT training, high intensity. Other people are very, or a much more, you know, long, steady state. And varying it up is really important. And actually, sometimes the type of exercise that we do naturally varies the loads anyway. So yoga is less intense than sprinting, for example, although someone out there will go, no, yoga, my yoga's intense. But you know the general concept that I'm saying. So look, I hope we got some takeaways. I hope we had a little look at the data, a little look at the evidence, a little bit of my liberal opinion, which I do like to spread about a lot. Don't worry, I know myself. And, you know, I hope that you get some kind of something from that around viewing and looking at movement.
Great stuff, Ben. Thank you so much. I've just tweeted out well, you know, you're such a good educator, but you're just so engaging from the very beginning. Just like, I can imagine people just going, huh, who's this guy? It's just brilliant. Thank you so much. It's brilliant. And I appreciate half an hour is very tricky to get the sort of stuff you were talking about fitted in, but you managed it.
Yeah, it's such a difficult, because it's kind of in between, isn't it? It's in between, you know, it's not 20 minutes. Well, obviously it's not 20 minutes and it's not 45 minutes, but conference presentations tend to be one or the other. So you threw me a curveball, Matt. What are you doing, buddy? I thought we were mates.
On your toes. Well, I believe in variability for presentations as well. I think it's, you know, I don't see that as an error in 30 minutes. I see it as a resource.
Matt, I look, see, it shows you were listening to me. Not many people do, but thank you for doing
that.
So.
Was really engaging, mate. And we've got some questions lined up for you. I think we'll start with the Italian one, as she will now be known as, is going to ask you a question. So let's do that.
Oh, can I? Oh, why can? Oh, yes. So, can we, first of all, can we?
Oh, I know this one. Oh,
yeah,
I know this Italian one. Oh.
Cupcake, can we remove your screen share so that I can see you all?
Of course, you would like to see me in full Technicolor.
Your accent was not enough.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh. Hi, Ben, you're right? Nice.
I'm very well, thank you, Anna. How are you?
Ben, this might sound a really, really stupid question, so forgive me for that. So lack of movement variability in pain, that's what you discuss now. What about in performance? So I work a lot with CrossFitters and weightlifters, and I struggle with the coaches to be that they are trying to be very, 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 very specific in the movement, to coach to actually remove the little bit of variability.
Yep.
And the argument that I always hear is that they are more efficient in their activity, so they can distribute the load better, therefore they can lift more. What do you think? Is that different between variability of movement for performance and variability of movement for pain?
Well, look, I think that pain has a profound effect on variation and variability. That's something that we know from kinematic research. I suppose the point about efficiency is that, you know, we could say, what is efficiency? And do you know what? We covered that in the slide, didn't we, about running efficiency? That when you try to visually identify the most efficient, actually, you don't do as well as you think you do. You know, when you measure it against VO2 max and all the other things that they did in that paper, you see that, you know, maybe what we think is ideal, what we think is good form, isn't quite as good as we think it is. So look, it's very hard, but you know, now we're talking about variability of mindset, aren't we? Which is a completely different thing, you know. So there's the variability of therapists or coaches' mindset, and that's a bigger battle to challenge. But I think that's why we need to look at evidence, but the evidence base here, and say kinematically, what do we see in different scenarios that helps inform us? So for me, that's why we discuss evidence-based medicine, because it gives us a central point where we can say, this is what we know, rather than this is what you say, this is what I say, etc. I would say that naturally, inherently, a little bit of variation and variability is a good thing. And that, you know, overcoaching can really, I think sometimes, actually, how do we know that some of these coaches haven't actually made people worse when they think they're going to make them better? So we're very good, aren't we, at thinking what we do tends to lead to a good outcome.
Especially with tweeters. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no. So if we think about, you know, back pain, how do we know we haven't made people worse with treatment? We like to think we've made them better, but we don't know we haven't made them worse.
But that's why my point is, because with the CrossFitters, especially where there is quite a lot of high intensity as well, not all the time they can keep that perfect form. So actually, I want them to be strong in the non-perfect form, so that they don't, you know, I always say strength and dysfunction, so that you do not incur injury, because you're strong in all the movement, with a knee in, with a knee out, with a knee up, with a bloody knee down, whatever your knee is. Yes, because I could not. Yes, I wanted to know if there was any research which I could not find on the efficiency of movement, so of variability and efficiency of movement.
Not that I know of, but I might go on a little literature hunt. Look, I'm too much of a nerd already. Now you're going to take me down a nerd hole, aren't you? Where I'm going to, you know, I'm going to have to nerd this question out. Thanks, Anna. Cheers. Thanks.
Anyway, thank you for thank you. Right. Good
Thank
answer.
you. Lovely to see you, Anna.
Peter.
Great question, Anna. Thank you very much. I think you should have access. If you've got a question you want to ask, then you should be able to click a button and like a little hand up thing will appear. But you could also just do the old fashioned way and stick your hand up. That also works, if that works for you. Ben, I've got a question for you, if that's all right. If no one else is going to jump in.
You. Not anyone else, not you again.
I just get a bit confused with, especially with when it comes to performance, because with a lot of, well, there's two things. First thing is, what about when it comes to lifting a lot of weight? Because we know if, for example, a power lifter or something, then suddenly form and the way you do it does come in. If you put your body out of it, there's a certain optimum posture, isn't it, for most heavy Olympic lifts and things? Otherwise, you're more likely to hurt yourself. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, well, how broad is that, though? That's the point, isn't it? If you're looking at it, what is the standard deviation around the mean? That's the way that I would see it. So I think we often see that mean value. We often see it as a very linear thing rather than a larger parameter, which could still be linear, but you know what I'm trying to say.
But does it get narrower the more load you're dealing with? Or is that?
Well, no, actually, if you look at experts, what they've done a lot of work in is experts versus novices. So I think what you find is actually novices tend to have less variability and experts tend to have more variability because they've got more ways of moving. They've got more ways of getting resource. They've got more ways of adjusting because they've learned their skill. They often talk about variabilities on a U shape. So at the very top, you have this element of, very variable, but noisy, problematic. And then you stabilize a skill at the bottom of the U, you come out the other end and you have usable variability where you can use this resource a bit better. It's the kind of, all human function is pretty much on a U shape, isn't it? It tends not to be around a singular point. So I think we could look at it better between experts and novices. But then again, some positions or some movements or some things will have elements where variability is higher and lower within the action. So it might be the top point is less variable for stability, but the thrust part is more variable because maybe we're getting more resource, etc. So as all of these things, I think we ask simplistic questions of complex phenomena.
Good stuff. Makes sense. Good answer. Anybody else?
I'm an expert at non-answers. How can I sound intelligent but slightly evade your question? It's a skill I've developed over many years.
It's like Mike James opened up with: the perfect answer is one that makes you ask more questions, and that's what you've done. So that's great.
That's what presenters tell themselves. That's how these kind of people want the answer, and I'm like, I don't know.
What about no one else is going to ask them? And I've got so many. Oh, good, Matt saved me. Okay, Matt, let's get. Have the other Matt for a while.
I stayed quiet, have I? Hi, Ben.
Hello, mate.
I've got one here. So I've been chatting to a local running coach over the last couple of months about my views on strength and conditioning, and in terms of the coaching side of things as well, because I've been taking my England Athletics run coaching qual.
Yeah.
And variability and loading is something that comes up quite a lot, and this coach is very traditional in that there's a way to run, and that strength training for runners involves very low weight, lots of high reps.
Right.
Now, when I've discussed it with them and kind of got a little bit deeper into it, one of the comebacks they have, or one of the sort of gut reactions they have is, well, what's the point in me then? What am I as a coach? If there is no right way to run, as it were, then what is my role as a coach? And I thought that was quite interesting. So I wondered what your view on that was.
So can I give you a boxing analogy?
Please do.
Can I change from running? Because I don't know anything about running. I'm not sure why Matt asked me here anyway. But anyway,
why would you be at this?
Who knows what's going on? But if I've done a fair bit of boxing coaching over the years. So if I have a guy who's steaming in, wants to punch, I can't turn him into the most perfect moving, counter-punching, beautiful boxer, but I can make him better, right? In the same way, am I going to turn this beautiful boxer into a brawler? Probably not. So our role as coaches is to maximize what people have, in my opinion. So I want to take this person and I want to make them better. I don't want to change them, or I do if I feel that's going to make them better. But the comeback to that is, so should everyone look like Paula Radcliffe? Because she was women's, marathon champion over the past however many years, right? So everyone should run like that because she did the best. She performed the best. Should everyone run like Usain Bolt? And you would say no, because they're genetic anomalies, because And the point is that we cannot take a singular ideal because there is a counter argument for every person. Let's take this person, let's try to make them better, but let's not turn them into something and someone they're not.
Just find their inner Paula as opposed to actual.
I love that. Find the inner Paula. There we go. Absolutely. How can we take this person and enhance what they have? Because as it comes back to that slide before, I can't tell you whether they're efficient or not efficient just by looking at you. So, I think that we have to, movement ideals are not always ideal.
Brilliant. Cheers.
Can't believe I was going to ask you about boxing. I thought that would be ridiculous because it's a running show, and I know Ben likes boxing, but let's keep that out. And bang, and he goes with, let's talk about boxing, Matt, because running ain't. Well, no, running. No, it's true though. I was going to ask you about that with boxing. Matt has a habit. Matt scars with asking questions that other people are about to ask. So yeah, Becky, it's true. He does. I did. Yeah, I still to make sure there's no other hands up. With performance again, let's take boxing. Okay, let's stick with boxing because then you're in your comfort zone there. We can see from your face you've done a bit of boxing in your life.
Oh, you bastard.
Where would you say variability fits in, for example, for having the perfect jab or the perfect cross? Or is it a case there's certain, to get that perfect jab, it is a trajectory which is going to come from the same angle and the same position and timing, or not?
Well, I think one of the great examples is I'm going to go to basketball. So what makes Michael Jordan amazing, right, is that he can hit the basket from when he's half bent over, twisted round some dude who's like 7 foot tall and is blocking him. So it's actually his ability to execute the skill in a non-perfect way that's the most amazing. And it's the same with boxing. It's not my ability to stand still and me to hit you with this perfect trajectory. It's when this geezer in front of you is moving, trying to hit you, trying to chase you around the ring and knock you the F out, that you're able to execute your skill in a non-perfect situation. So actually, maybe the ability to execute a skill non-perfectly is the perfect.
I like it. Yeah, good stuff, mate. Brilliant. You what's the word? Inspire, it's too strong. You just make me think every time you open your mouth. I'm like thinking, yeah. Brilliant stuff. Great. Thanks, Ben. Really good. It's 12:30 now. Same question to you. I know it's a bit dodgy because of the whole state we're in the world, but what do you got planned, Ben, for the rest of the year?
Well, I had about 5 things that I was meant to do over the next month. Traveling, I was meant to be in Poland, and I was meant to be in the US and all sorts of things. But of course, the situation has gone a bit, upside down. I was going to use another word, but I decided not to.
Thank you very much.
And so what am I up to? I've got some various online bits coming up, something November 21st, 22nd, where I talk about, the usual stuff that I talk about, movement and pain and exercise and all these different things. And then obviously me and Adam have got the BCP rolling along, which is going great guns, great community we're building, opportunity for people to get involved in a, different style of education, maybe not so academic, maybe a little bit more real world magazine style, which seems to be appealing to people. So I'm doing loads of stuff, probably not that much of note, unfortunately.
That's the Better Clinician project,
yes, of course. See, it just trips off my tongue now, the Better Clinician project.
No, it's definitely worth catching up with people. And I've always said from the beginning that the combination of you and Adam Meakins we're talking about here together is a match made in heaven. It's brilliant.
Or an absolute nightmare for some. I am positive about that.
Well, again, we celebrate variability when it comes to listening pleasures, but I think it works. I think you work really well together. And I've
been pleasantly surprised. There, I have had to seek counselling on more than one occasion. We won't talk about that, all right?
Yeah, most people are pleasantly surprised when they meet Adam for the first time because you couldn't not be. But anyway, we won't go down that. Maybe the problem. Exactly. All right, Ben, thanks very much so much for joining us. We're going to see you again in the question times. And obviously, if there's any other point during the day you're around and want to chime in, then we'll bring you up as well. All right, mate. Of course. And the dogs. Thank you.
There's the cue for me to go.
Live. That's brilliant. You go for it.
It's real life. I'm going to have my kids running next.
Cheers,
all
mate.
right, buddy. My pleasure.
You're listening to Runchatlive podcast, putting the evidence back into running injury and performance.